back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys, so I am here today to do a book review, and the book that I'm going to be reviewing is Deadhouse Gates, which is the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. And I am giving this a 3.5 star rating because for me this book was not as good as the first one, but I will definitely be continuing on with the series because I plan to read the whole series this year. And let me tell you what this one's all about. This book is a lot longer than Gardens of the Moon. Gardens of the Moon was like 700 and something. This one is almost 1,000 pages, so it's pretty big. I actually tend to listen to these books as an audiobook whilst also reading them every now and then. I sort of switch back and forth depending on whether I'm busy or not, because I like to listen to audiobooks whilst I am working on uni projects. There were elements of this book that I did enjoy, but there were equally elements that I really didn't, because this one is actually not a direct sequel to the first book in the series. This one is actually more focused on different characters than the first one, whereas the third book is more of a sequel to the first book. So it's a little bit confusing to get your head around, but essentially what happens is that we meet a lot of very new characters in this book, and we don't focus too much on the characters that we already know and love from Gardens in the Moon, which for me, it wasn't a bad thing. I liked meeting the new characters, but it definitely meant that it took a little while to get back into the world because we are in a completely different place and we're focusing on mostly new characters. We do meet some of the old ones again, so it did take a little while to get into. Equally, the middle section I felt like was very slow paced, and this book is definitely a slow read. It's intentionally done that way. It's meant to be slow, it's meant to drag on because it focuses on a large journey that they are undertaking. But for me, I just felt it was a little bit too slow. There were moments where I was a little bit bored and I didn't love it, so I certainly feel like Gardens of the Moon was more entertaining and exciting as a whole. However, there are moments within this that are very exciting. There are moments of sheer brutality and horrible things happen lots of the time, so it's definitely a really shocking book, and it's very entertaining for that factor. I felt like the characters in this, some of them were engaging and entertaining. I felt like we really got to know the characters of the first book, whereas this one I don't feel like I've got to know all of the characters as much yet. I'm sure that we will over the course of the books, but in this one I don't feel like I know any of them as well as I know the characters from Gardens of the Moon, despite it being longer. So in this book there are some characters from the previous, as I said. Kalam, Fiddler, Crocus, Empress Lucine and Apsala are all in this book again, although they're not the only focus of the book. There are other characters as well. Some of the new ones who we meet include FELISIN, Huboric, Shaik, Coltane, Icarium and Mappo, Dukia and Pust. Of all of these characters, I think I was most drawn to Kalam and FELISIN'S storylines. I think they are the most interesting in terms of what I like to read about. However, I do see how Dukia and Coltane's storyline is interesting, but for me it was just a little bit too battle heavy. I think both Kalam and FELISIN were really interesting characters. They were each on their own sort of personal journey, and they each had their own mission of what they wanted to do. FELISIN is a young girl who I found it really easy to connect with. She is in a very brutal and sad situation where she doesn't really have anyone around her she can trust, and by coincidence she ends up with a few characters who take her along on their journey, whether she wants to go or not. But I did feel like her storyline started off really well. At points I really hated her, and then at points I was in love with her character again and just felt like she was really great. So it definitely took a few ups and downs, but I think that's a good thing, and it made you constantly question her character. She is a very young child, essentially. She's only 14 when this starts, so she is actually quite a young child for the world, and the brutality is even more so and more harsh because it's her in this situation and she's a younger character. Kalam, on the other hand, is on a kind of personal vendetta mission, which I really enjoyed seeing, and he goes on a lot of adventures with various different people as he is going on this mission, and I really liked seeing all of his connections that he made and where he ended up and what happened with his story. I do, as I say, admire the intentions of Coltane and Dukia. I think they are on a good mission, and I certainly grew to like them as characters. I think they're really interesting characters. They're both very noble. They both want to support the Malazans, and they want to ensure that they are doing the best they can for getting the refugees through the desert, which is where most of this is set. But unfortunately, I just felt like their storyline was the most uninteresting to me personally, because I'm not a huge fan of battle-heavy books, and their storyline definitely focuses a lot on being besieged, being attacked, fighting different people and clans throughout the desert. Although it's very, very entertaining from terms of the brutality and the harshness and the reality of the world, I just didn't feel like, for me, it was the most entertaining story out of the lot, and that's why I didn't love them as much as many of the other people who I read it with did. This was my book of the month for my read-along group, which I will link down below if you guys want to check that out on Goodreads, because we are always reading different stuff. Iskarul Pust was another character who I really enjoyed meeting. He's kind of like the Cropper of this book. Cropper is a character who I mentioned in my Gardens of the Moon, and I really, really enjoyed. But in this one we have Iskarul Pust, who is kind of similar but also very different. Iskarul Pust is a little bit insane. He kind of speaks his thoughts out loud a lot of the time, and he's very good at plotting and trying to get characters to do things and manipulating them, and I really enjoyed seeing him over the course of the story as he got more excited about things and he started to reveal all his plans to everyone, and it's quite entertaining to see him as a character. Finally, Mappo and Ikariam are characters who I really enjoyed. They have a really nice relationship as friends who have constantly been travelling the world. They're both very, very old and we don't know a lot about them. Their relationship, we don't really know how it formed. And these are all things that we do get told over the course of the story and we learn a lot more about. I felt like they had some really excellent moments of character development, and they were probably the two characters who I felt were most interesting in terms of their relationship, because they had some really wonderful brotherly love, heart-to-heart moments, which I loved seeing, and I felt like theirs was very emotional. FELISIN'S story is also emotional, but theirs was emotional in a different way. So in this book we are essentially following 4 different storylines, which is a little bit difficult to keep track of at times, but it's quite easy once you get the hang of who is where. The first storyline is the train of refugee Malazans, and they are attempting to cross a desert. They're constantly being hounded by rebellious forces. They have to face all sorts of different battle. I touched on that a little bit before. The next is the young girl FELISIN, who is taken prisoner early on in the story. Despite having connections with the new adjunct, she is in a very bad situation, thrown into some really traumatic scenes. She does have a few associates, as I mentioned, who are actually quite good at escaping and getting out of tricky spots. They have their own goals and they're working on their own plots, so they're quite cunning, and she sort of gets wrapped up in their storyline and she doesn't really know where she's going, but she kind of gets pulled into their story as well, and their adventure later becomes her own. Next, we are looking at one of the characters from Gardens of the Moon, as he attempts to get revenge on the Empire for all of the terrible things that they have exacted on their bridge burner crew in book number 1. And that storyline is certainly one of the more abstract and crazy. Some really awesome stuff happens and some really terrible stuff happens, but some of the elements I just didn't expect, and it was really good. And finally, we have Mappo and Ikariam's story, which is one of friendship, and it's also one of companionship and habit. Duty and heartache also feature heavily. All of these storylines, of course, do intertwine as the story goes on. They all interweave with one another, and there are connections between them all. Those are the 4 main threads that we are following across the book, and we're trying to work out how everything connects and what's going to happen. Erikson's writing in these books, I think, is really, really good. He's very good at bringing to life scenes that you may not have imagined in such brutality. He's very good at bringing to life these horrible images of sadness and betrayal. Not necessarily the happiest of subjects, but it's certainly not a happy series because it is the Malazan Book of the Fallen. He has also come up with a world where pretty much anything goes. Any sort of fantastical element that you can think of is probably going to appear in this at some point. We have like ghost ships that appear, we've got dragons, we've got all sorts of really awesome elements that I just didn't expect to be in this series thrown together. We've got loads of different cultures, we've got loads of different races. It's very, very entertaining from a fantastical point of view because there is a lot going on. It's just difficult to keep track of all of the various things going on in your head, especially when you've only read the first 2 books. I think as the series goes on, it will probably become a little bit more manageable as you near the end, but I feel like there is constantly new stuff being added, and it's exciting and it's fresh, and it definitely feels like he's uniquely crafted this world into something that is original and exciting. The world itself is very dark. There is a very grim and somber tone to the whole story. As I say, It's very, very brutal and only the toughest can survive. The setup of this story allows for a couple of characters to sort of stand tall and be the proud leaders and be the ones that we're following and be the ones that we want to root for. But many of these leaders, it doesn't mean that you're immune from death. There's no shortage of deaths, and people who we think are going to survive die, or people that we think are dead are not dead. So there's all sorts of mind trickery that goes on in this book and this series, and I do enjoy seeing that. I do enjoy the way that he weaves his stories together. It's quite complicated. You're always thrown straight into the action and you don't know what's going on. You have to figure it out. But I do enjoy the way he writes. He's pushing the limits a little bit of fantasy, and it's nice to see that. As I have slightly touched on before, my main complaint with this book is that I really did not like the battle scenes, because at first they were entertaining and at first I was really, really engaged, but as there were more and more, it just didn't interest me as much and it didn't connect with me as much. And although there were some brutal moments that I still remember and I'm sure I will continue to remember, I just felt like it was a bit samey at times, so it wasn't amazingly original in the battle scenes. I definitely understand the need for this storyline. It's a major part of the plot and it's certainly interesting in places and we get to see awesome character development. But for me, I'm just not a fan of it, so it wasn't a massive deal with the book, it was just a personal preference. So whilst I had a few small complaints with the pacing of the book and the focus of some areas of the book, I think it's a really, really great book overall, and I will definitely be continuing on with the series. I'm very, very excited for book number 3 because we're going to be returning to some of the characters from Gardens of the Moon, and I'm sure that's going to be entertaining. I've already started it and I'm really enjoying book 3 already. Definitely would love to chat to you guys about this book. If you have read the Malazan series, then definitely leave me your thoughts down below about this book and the first. Obviously not any of the later ones because I have not read them yet, but I am super, super excited to hear your comments. And if you do want to join the Goodreads group, as I say, I will link it down below. We're always reading different stuff. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye! Me and you gonna have a little chat.